I'm alive. I shouldn't be.
He should not be alive. This is unfucking believable.
From the heart of trucker America, my boy Reed Coverdale, host of The Naturalist Capitalist.
This is what government does. It sucks.
If you think you're going to win people over by stating commonplaces, you're just selling the other part.
It is about dictating every transaction that you have for the rest of your life.
Mr. Potato Head.
Coverdale is the guy to be president of the United States.
You intimidated me with your perfect 70s porn stash.
That was the beginning of my problem.
He died doing what he loved, chasing a minor.
But I'll put a 50 cal attached to my Suburban.
Libertarians need to get out of New York.
The gulag is going to be in your house.
This guy's a fucking murderer. He deserves to be in a
Gotta get him out of that truck at night and get him into the White House.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Naturalist Capitalist. I am coming to you from the free state of New Hampshire, and it is hot. It is almost 100 degrees. I think it was 97 last time I looked. And it's very humid, and my allergies are acting up a little bit. The pollen is really bad. So if I look a little puffy-eyed and a little congested, that's why. It's because of the allergies. If you're new to the show, please subscribe to the channel and also look at the links in the description and follow me everywhere that you have a platform as well. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Odyssey, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the RSS feeds you can find. I've got links to most of them in the description, but most importantly, follow me on Telegram and Substack. That's where I'm putting out a lot of my work recently. I'm writing articles on Substack, and I'm trying to use Telegram as sort of a replacement for Twitter. So please subscribe to me on all those channels and follow me on all those platforms. Anyway, let's get into the show. As you guys might know, I got slightly canceled almost 2 weeks ago now for going to an event that Nick Fuentes was featured in. He was featured in a film, and he also was attending it to give a little bit of a speech and also answer questions. So I figured I'd have the two guys on that kind of got me involved with this. So first is Jason Rink. How you doing today, Jason?
Hey, man. Good to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to finally have you on. So I've been talking to Jason for, I don't know, a few weeks now, probably a week ahead of FreedomFest, about this whole debacle. You guys might have heard about it. And then the other guy who's involved with this is Patriot J. How you doing today, Jay?
What up, Reed? I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. So this is really your fault because, you know, I was like, there's probably no way I can get involved in this. And then you show up at the last minute and you're like, hey, I'm going to this like Fuentes event thing tonight. And I was like, oh, you're going? I have to go now. So then I called up Jason and said, hey, I'm going with someone you think you could get me into. And that's how I got in. But I just want to kind of break down what this thing was and what happened and what my takeaway was from it, and then what you guys think too. But Jason, I'm sure most people have probably heard of this story by now. I know you went on a lot of other podcasts and, you know, it was kind of making the rounds, but just give us a brief description of what happened. Like, you had this film that you're going to premiere at FreedomFest. What happened? Why didn't it end up getting premiered at FreedomFest? And what was the alternative you had to go with?
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, and, you know, long story short, I think with this is we submitted a short 21-minute version of this film. The film you guys screened was actually, I think, 47 because we expanded it. But the original film was about Nick Fuentes, called The Most Canceled Man in America. And it was primarily about how the federal government took $500,000 from his bank account, put him on a no-fly list, didn't charge him with a crime. And you know, we submitted it to Freedom Fest. They were initially very excited about it. And then, you know, some missteps happened on their end. I let them know that if they were interested in Nick speaking on a Q&A or something, he was going to attend the screening. And we said, you know, hey, we'll check with Nick and see if that works. Well, they sort of jumped the gun and announced that he'd be on a panel and that the film was showing. And so as soon as that email went out, people like really lost their minds. And so they took him off the panel, and then things didn't die down. And they eventually just said, no, we're not going to screen the film either. And, you know, so that's how that all sort of started. And I ended up writing our Substack about this situation because the initial reasoning they gave to me was that 6 pretty, major libertarian organizations or leaders of those organizations had contacted them. And that was why they decided, maybe showing the film wasn't such a great idea. And so as a result of that, then Nick decided, well, I'm going to just go ahead and have a screening because, in many ways, Nick feeds off of cancellation. It builds his brand, frankly. And so, he set out to put this separate screening on in Vegas. And, it's funny, man, nobody else really asked me to get into it. Yeah, a couple of people might have, but you're one of the few guys that I was like, all right, we'll see if we can get Reed in, because I thought it'd be interesting to have your perspective on the film and, for you to go there and sort of weigh in on what your thoughts on that were. So yeah, that screening happened. It was totally off site in a very private location. And I think there was like 140 people out at it, many Groypers. And then some of us who were
Groiper. Yeah, I told PJ, I was like, yeah, they were all yelling about this guy, Roy Pert. I don't know who he is, but they were way into him, whoever he is. So before I throw it over to PJ, just tell us, like, Jason, what do you believe in? Are you a Groiper? Are you a neo-Nazi? Are you a white supremacist? Like, who is Jason Rink? Like, what is your belief system?
Yeah. So, I would say for your audience, I would say I don't have any positions that I can identify that I don't ultimately agree with, like Dave Smith on. Like, so I'm really a Ron Paul libertarian philosophically, I guess. And, I was involved in Ron Paul's 08 campaign. That's how I started all of this stuff. And, I currently have a license plate on my truck that says a Ron Paul is my license plate, so it's like, I pretty much love the guy. And, I would say, I'm a monthly contributor to the Mises Caucus. I've, a dues paying member of the LP, even though I don't see the LP strategically being the best path for political outcomes. So I'm not an America First Groiper guy. But when I started making a film on the Stop the Steal movement and ended up making, I was filming on January 6th, a lot of other projects. We've got a couple other projects in the hopper. I spent like 10 weeks pretty deep in like the MAGA culture, crossed paths with Nick, Ali Alexander, all of these other people. And what I would say is I really developed a lot of empathy for MAGA during that time. And frankly, for like, America First and the Groypers, like, I have mutual respect for Nick. Like, I think he's got a lot of courage, and I think he's a really interesting subject for a film. Like, I think what's happening, what he's doing, how he's been attacked, and what he's building on the right, I think is interesting. And so that's what I would say. So it was actually my filmmaking partner and the director of the film, Paul Escondone, who, Paul's much more on the right than I am, frankly. Like, he's much more aligned, I would say, with America First. Paul's never really been a libertarian. And so we have this relationship. He really headed up the film, and I weighed in on it. I stand behind it, but yeah. So I think it's more about me having empathy for what's happening, what people are thinking, what's motivating people on like the MAGA right. And that's sort of at the center of the 3 different films I'm working on right now.
All right. So since you're not an America First Groiper, I'll throw it over to the America First Groiper. So Patriot J, just tell us, I've been following you on Twitter for, I don't know, 2 years when I had Twitter, and I interacted with you a lot. You're fucking hilarious. You put out some great music and shit, but politically, where do you come from? How did you gain popularity? What's your story?
Well, I'm black and I'm 25 years old, so I was born a Democrat. It takes a lot of, I guess, training and conditioning to get out of that mindset. So I went to college. I learned how to think. I took critical thinking. I examined every side of the political aisle, and I found that my interests were more aligned with conservatives. And so 2015 was kind of when I made this change. And that's the start of like the 2016 campaign cycle. So I decided to check out the right. I went to like a Ben Carson rally, and then Trump came around, and I was immediately drawn to Trump because he's got that kind of like brash, in your face, anti-establishment personality. So I really respected that. I cast my first vote for Donald Trump, and I've been like a hard right extremist, I guess, since 2016.
I'm trying to imagine like going from a Ben Carson rally to a Trump rally. Like you're like sedated, falling asleep in the first one, and then the next one's just like, whoa, what the fuck? This is awesome.
Yeah, dude, you could totally tell the energy. Like the Ben Carson stuff was more like traditional, old school Republican. Like everybody there was probably a father of 4 and a grandparent of 2. I'm like the youngest guy in the crowd, and then I think the first time I heard Trump speak, he was already president. It was at like one of the CPACs, I think, in 2018. But that blew my mind. Like just to be in that room with him and listening to him speak, you can totally feel the energy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not even sure the term rally is appropriate for a Ben Carson rally. Like I'd call it like a Ben Carson congregation or something like that. I think I'd use like a different, I mean, I've never been to one, but yeah. But, so in 2021, after the 2020 election, were you in Washington, D.C. on January 6th and all that? Or what?
Yeah, so I went to D.C. like November 2020 for the first Stop the Steal rally. And then I went back for Jan 6. I went to listen to Trump speak. And thankfully, I was really hungry after Trump spoke. So I got lunch. And then while I'm getting lunch, I'm just watching on the TV all the madness that happened at the Capitol. It was probably the most consequential lunch of my entire life, I would say. If I was not hungry, I would have been down there at that Capitol, and Lord knows where I would have been.
That's funny. Yeah. I think you were wearing a shirt that said tummy ache survivor when we took a picture with Nick. So your stomach saved you, man. You could be in solitary confinement right now.
Seriously.
So, Jason, were you at the Capitol on January 6th too?
Yeah. I actually didn't go to the first Stop the Steal thing in DC. I ended up cutting a little video together of it though, and tagged Ali on Twitter. I didn't know Ali, and he messaged me, and I was like, "Hey, man, what if me and another guy just kind of follow you guys around?" And he's like, "All right, well, let's meet up." And he wanted to make sure I wasn't, just looking to do a hit piece. But then, so we met him up in Georgia shortly after that first DC event. And then I spent the next, 8 or 10 weeks, really, me and Paul all over the country with different Stop the Steal events. So that naturally led us up to Jan 6. I mean, we were really behind the scenes with Ali and a lot of the planning and stuff when that was happening. And
that's going to get clipped out of context. Like, yeah, we were there on January 6th, but, behind the scenes with all the planning. And
yeah, well, all of the I've gotten all of the emails from all of the 3-letter organizations at this point looking for our footage. So, but it's funny. It's like I was actually at the Trump rally and left early because there was a permitted stage on the side of the Capitol for Stop the Steal speakers to speak at. And so I had a video guy setting up over there. So I left the speech early to walk across there to check on how things were going and everything. So what's interesting is when I got to, the reflecting pool side of the Capitol, I was right there when the first breach happened of those barricades. Right. And I remember looking up at the hill, and there was in my recollection, there was 3 or 4 Capitol police standing on that grassy hill. And I saw this happening. I looked behind me, and there's waves of thousands of people coming over. And I was like, yeah, this is going to get out of hand pretty fast. And so the documentary filmmaker in me wanted to go up there, and the guy with some wisdom of years and with a family and recognizing how the narrative was going to get spun from the beginning, I was like, no, I'm staying out of there. So I didn't go in, fortunately. So again, I'm sort of in your camp, Patriot J. It's like, if I hadn't had that moment of clarity, I could be in a lot more trouble right now.
Yeah. So let's just get into the screening event. So you actually came and picked both of us up because we had to go to an undisclosed location. You didn't even know where it was initially, right? They had to find somewhere, and then they told you where it was.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting for people to know that. So they had secured 3 different locations, and the first one got canceled a week out from the event. And so they went to like a backup, and then they had a backup of a backup. And because that's sort of the nature of things with anything Nick does, right? It's like they have to mitigate, they have to have a great secrecy around anything they're doing, because people will then find out where it is. They'll call the establishment will kick them out. So yeah, so they ended up paying for 2 different venues that night and only used one. And so it was at that theater that we were at. So yeah, I didn't even know till like 30 minutes before the event actually where it was at. And that's kind of how it's tended to be with things with them. So yeah, we went and Ubered over there together, and you know, and also, you know, like I've built a lot of goodwill with Nick over this time, and so I didn't want to I wanted to make sure I wasn't bringing in anybody who's just gonna you know, I knew you wouldn't do that. I didn't know you, Patriot J, but I was like, all right, so you guys got the blessing to come in from you know, Beardson and Nick. So yeah. So we arrived there, and you know, I think what's interesting to also know is that, you know, we were going to screen it at FreedomFest and have a Q&A with Nick in what would have been maybe a more hostile environment where people could have asked things about him or the film and challenged him. Instead, he ends up having an event that generated a lot of money for his organization, by the way.
What censorship does, people don't understand. Like if you, they just don't get it.
and then it's a Q&A of all of his fans, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so it's a totally different dynamic, right? Than it could have been. And I think that's another thing that I think was lost in all of this was, you know, you've really, in a way, I think Freedom Fest generated like tens of thousands of dollars for the America First Foundation and a like epic event. And Nick comes out feeling like victorious about it. And I think he should. I mean, I think it's a testimony to what he can actually pull off when he's able to pull off a screening like that sort of last minute and get a bunch of people to come out to Vegas for it. So So then we did some Q&A afterwards, and I don't know how that occurred for you guys. I think I said a lot of things from there that I think were generally like encapsulated what I think and why I pursued the film and why I thought it was important. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear what you guys thought about the screening overall, the film, and the event itself. You know. Yeah.
So, Patriot J, what's your history with Nick, and how did you find out about this event to begin with?
I started following Nick, I want to say maybe spring of 2020. I think I had like followed him on Twitter, and then we met at a CPAC/AFPAC after party in 2020. And when we met, I decided to check him out a little more. So this was like right at the beginning of COVID. So he was doing a lot of like Zoom calls with these TikToks, and he would just go in like a 60-person Zoom and basically school everybody. And I was really impressed with the way he kind of debated and just spoke. So I started following him a bit more after that. And then I think we met again at one of the Stop the Steal events, and then I saw him again at the screening.
Gotcha. So just from my perspective, I don't really know a ton about Nick. I mean, I just watched his episode with Alex Stein, which was very eye-opening, very good. I'd recommend everyone go check that out. It's on Conspiracy Castle. But the only like video or speeches I've seen of Nick's were when he was debating Dave Smith or Ryan Dawson, and then like a few isolated clips of him that I'd seen taken out of context. And then I'd heard him talk about some things about immigration and some general policies I disagree with him on. But as far as like the controversial stuff, like I hadn't ever like really done a ton of research into what he thinks, because frankly, never really cared. Like it's always amazed me how fanatic his haters and support base are for seemingly, comparatively to the outrage, uncontroversial statements, I guess. Like that's always been my kind of opinion of him. But when we showed up, you know, for a neo-Nazi or white nationalist event, a lot of people were very happy to see you, Patriot J. Like you were greeted with tons of handshakes and hugs and high fives, and you obviously knew a lot of people in the crowd. It was very friendly, and then, you know, no one was rude to us at all. I remember even after the event, I got a picture with Patriot J and Nick, and I shook Nick's hand. I just told him, hey, I'm a libertarian. I'm impressed with some of what you say, because I didn't feel the need to debate him there. But, you know, some of what he said in the film I agreed with, about the establishment screwing us over. And, you know, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I think he has valid anger about. You know, I don't agree with some of his solutions that I've heard, but I agree with a lot of his contention. So, you know, and I told him I was a libertarian, wasn't upset at me, wasn't upset at you. And so I don't know, I came away with it interested. I was like, I want to find out more about this guy, maybe talk to him eventually sometime. And, you know, I feel like the image that I am supposed to have of him is incomplete or incorrect. That was how I came away from the event feeling about Nick. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Is that something you hear a lot when people like actually start watching some of his stuff or meet him in person? Is there a lot of surprise? Or
yeah, and you know, I think I'll second the Alex Stein interview, because I think Nick comes across in the way that I've experienced him a lot, right? And it's interesting to note, I think that Alex had his like speaking tour with Charlie Kirk's organization like freaking canceled after that. And again, another example of people not quite knowing what they're stepping into with Nick.
Right.
And again, if you see that interview, or even if you see our film, I think like the conclusion that I came to is I was like, look, this is one of the more interesting people out there in the political landscape. And interesting doesn't mean like full endorsement. I mean, like,
right.
how uninteresting that would be anyway. It's like, so I have a very, very much the same experience. Like I actually sat next to Nick at a dinner prior to the screening, and I ended up talking to him longer than I have ever, you know, other than in an interview situation. And, you know, another thing is like, he's built this video streaming platform from scratch that he's using now. And like, it's actually very advanced. It's quite a bit of technology, and it's costing him to run that like 1/10 of what it costs normal streaming to do it, because I couldn't see how he's running this thing and spending that money on it. So he told me a little bit about that. And, you know, it's like, so he's just a guy that I think people shouldn't underestimate him. And I think pushing him aside into the margins isn't really helping the discussion. And, you know, I think the other thing is when he goes on to be interviewed or debated by people who have other audiences, I think the opportunity there that can happen is like with Dave Smith. It's like, well, people in Dave Smith's audience will watch it and they'll be exposed to Nick, and they'll see Dave like, you know, challenge Nick on things, but also Nick's following will go watch him on Dave Smith. And it's like, they may be exposed to ideas. You know, Nick has said he would vote for Dave Smith for president if Trump wasn't running. He's like, I'll vote Trump, but he's like, I'll vote for Dave Smith. He has mutual respect for Dave Smith. And I think that's the key, is like, can we generate a mutual respect where we can have conversation and we can engage with the ideas openly, because I think we all benefit from that. So yeah. So as far as an incomplete picture, the biggest criticism we had on the film was that we didn't put enough negative stuff about Nick in it. And, you know,
this is also from people who never watched the film, right? They just saw the trailer. Most of them.
Yeah. The people, and some people who watched the film came to that conclusion too. They're like, you needed to say way more about how he's a villain and terrible and evil. And I was like, can we just show something that's like really Nick and the Groypers in their own words about how they see themselves and what they're making and what they're building? I'm like, I think that's useful. And it's a way to make a film. It's not the way. People can challenge us on whether it's good or we could have done it better, whatever, make your own film. But, you know, that's the way we saw it.
Yeah. So, well, actually, why don't you answer that too? Is that kind of, do you get that reaction a lot? Did you ever have that reaction to him, Patriot J, or were you like always aware that he was kind of overblown as far as the attacks go?
So I think it's kind of different, because I'm kind of in the same camp as you, where like I met him first, and then I wanted to do a little bit of a more deep dive into what he believes and what he talks about. But I think when you kind of meet him, you realize that he's just another human being, you know, and he's not this evil character that people on Twitter portray him as. I like him because I think he's only 1 year younger than me. Like there are not many young people who have the power to gravitate a movement as large as he has. Like he's really galvanized young American voters, and I think that should be really respected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So to be honest, I told both of you guys this the vibes I got was very similar to like a youth group or something, where it seemed to me like I was in a group with a bunch of gay men who were uncomfortable with their sexuality and, just like worshiping this young live streamer. That was the most critical, a takeaway that I had was like, these guys aren't Nazis. They're not even racist. It doesn't seem. It seems like if anything, they're kind of put off by a lot of degeneracy, and they're just kind of stuffing everything and like having this really like straight-laced approach to life or whatever. It just reminded me of growing up in church, basically. That was kind of my takeaway. I don't know if that's unfair or what you guys think about that, but
the racist community is so welcoming, and as long as you're racist, they don't care what color you are.
Yeah. Well, and man, like I think the question comes down to like, was the event cool? Whatever. And I won't go so far as to phrase it the way that you would, but I will say that people might be interested to, like, I experienced this when I was at AFPAC because we were filming there, which is his like CPAC thing. And there was like 1,200 dudes there. I mean, mostly dudes.
Right.
And like multiple times breaking out, chanting Christ is King in the middle of that thing. And I've never been to a church before where that has happened. It's like that many people are like doing that. And so he's definitely blending like his Catholic faith, the way it occurs for him, by the way, a lot of the men coming into the movement, I think are a product of our society and environment. They're looking for certain things. I think they're finding some anchoring in that faith, even though there's other people that are totally not Christian who are there. And then they're finding a place that's welcoming to them, not only online, but in real life. And it's a place also where, Nick spends a lot of time joking around, and he, a lot of these guys are like meme lords. And it's like, there's a comedy, there's a politically incorrect comedy attraction that many of these people have to Nick, because they're growing up in a society where like comedy has been destroyed. It's like you can't find off color, politically incorrect comedy anywhere anymore. And Nick really is funny. Like he has a great sense of humor, and again, he's a good orator. He organizes his ideas really well, and he's very intelligent, so he's got a lot of things that he brings to the equation. And so when he comes to the event, he gives a speech, people are asking questions. A lot of those people have never been in the same room with Nick before, and so they're like super excited about it. And, but yeah, I think the youth group, the analogy is not too far off the mark there.
I don't know if you got any comments, PJ, could throw them in.
Nah, I think Jason just summed that up perfectly, honestly, because everything that he was saying, like I was drawn to him because he's funny, and there's just not like a place in today's society for straight Christian men, as sad as that is, So when you have somebody who's willing to stand up for it, it's only natural that people will gravitate towards it, and because it's so polarizing, they want to grab hold of it even tighter.
Yeah.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point earlier, Jason, about how if this had been allowed to take place at FreedomFest, it would have probably been overwhelmingly critical. A bunch of people who disagree with Nick on a whole litany of issues would have been in the room with him. Instead, it turned into kind of this love fest for him, like this, it was almost like he was on an altar because he's there with all his fans. It's less like that's the only people who were allowed to go, and they felt empowered because they weren't allowed at this main stream event. And this is something I try to tell people. This is just a natural recourse to censorship, deplatforming. I've said, you know, whether or not you have legitimate ideas, if you are censored, you are legitimized regardless of how good or bad your ideas are. So if they're true ideas that you're just not allowed to touch because they're afraid you're going to uncover something, you're legitimized. And if you just have straight up bad ideas, but you're not allowed to talk about them, you instantly legitimize them. So this was just a case in point, proof in the pudding example of that actually happening. I don't know, any comments from either of you on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important to recognize. Like, there's just a real blowback in all of this that that cancellation generates. And, you know, people have accused me too of like this was a big marketing tactic, because that's why I blew up the whole thing between me and FreedomFest and whatever. And like, number one, I'm not that good to have, you know, written this script. I mean, because, you know, I ended up getting banned from the Mirage and the Venetian as a result, like as sort of cascading effects of being involved in Nick's film. And it's like, dude, that's not fun. And, you know, I don't have a Twitter account and all that stuff sucks. And at the same time, like, I have leaned into the fact that all 3 films I'm working on right now have gotten me canceled from different places. They're all counter narrative. And like, I've started leaning in and building a brand around that, and it's working, you know, and it's like for better or worse. And the other thing is that it also generates a real freedom. So what I've really started to embrace is like, I don't really have to apologize to anybody about anything. I mean, I really love a lot of the people involved in FreedomFest. I have a lot of friends there. I've been going for like 10 years. And but at the end of the day, I don't need anybody to like me. Like, and I'm not getting money from anybody there. And I'm not trying to build my little libertarian personal brand and got to make sure I get on all these things. Like, that's not a concern for me. And because I'm canceled off a lot of places, and I'm speaking also for how it occurs for Nick, I know, is that once they remove you, it's like they have very little power over you. And so it's like, all I got to do is find my little corner of the internet, find the people who stand with me on what I'm about. And the next thing I know, I'm like, man, I feel really free now. I'm not even measuring my words. I could say what I think. I'm not worried about losing another channel. So that's the other thing I think is interesting, is it actually kind of frees up the person. Once they get to the other side of it, they're like, yeah, it's actually not too bad over here.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Go ahead.
I like being canceled. You know, I've just in my, like, I don't know, past 2 years of growing on Twitter, I used to do music. I've always done music, but I wasn't always Patriot J before I was J Hots, and I was more local. I really wanted my local hometown people to rock with me. But unfortunately, there are a bunch of libs who just couldn't get over the fact that I like Donald Trump. So I got canceled in my own hometown. In fact, like a girl who I used to hang out with frequently, we share a birthday. We would party together on our birthday every year. She sent an email to my school and the California bar before I was admitted, trying to get me kicked out and prevented me from getting barred, all because I made a joke about Black Lives Matter. Mind you, I'm a black man. So I just thought that was hilarious. And once that happened, I realized, like, oh, you know, I'm never really going to appease these people. I might as well make music that truly that like I truly resonate with on a deep vibrational level. And if I put that out there, the people who like it are going to come to me and they're going to support me. And I should worry less about these people who are just born to be haters.
Yeah. And I want to make one statement about that too, man, because like you know, the Southern Poverty Law Center, you know, wrote that article at Freedom Fest. You know, congratulations, Reed, for making the list. I've been on there for a little while, so it's good to have you.
Are you on there, Patriot J, or have they not?
Oh, I gotta go harder, man.
Yeah.
You're definitely the most racist out of the 3 of us, too. So
yeah.
I need SPLC, I need ADL. Give me all of that.
Maybe let me see if I can just forward that photo of you with Nick over to them, dude. I think that'll do it.
Just cut me out of it and just show him.
Well, but what I think that article proves is that it doesn't matter. They are going to do anything they can to do 6 degrees to white nationalist, you know? And it's like, because they bring up the whole Nick being on a panel after he got canceled. So it's like, it didn't even matter that they quote unquote did the right thing according to the SPLC. It's like, no, they still attach everybody to him. And then it's like, well, if Nick didn't exist, they'd attach you to Ryan Dawson or it's whatever. And it's like, and they're taking Andrew Yang. And it's just like, it's this whole thing where it's like, guys, don't bend the knee, reject the premise, reject the premise.
Ryan Dawson denied that he's a Holocaust denier to me on my show. And Andrew Yang was also speaking at a place where I wasn't even speaking, but I just had a table. So that makes him a white national or something. I was just like, what the fuck is this article? It was incredible. Yeah. Do you guys find that this type of shit, I feel like it actually fuels more racism than if someone is a racist, I feel like the best way to diffuse it is actually to let them get up and speak. Because once you start asking like, okay, what are you willing to do to create your ethno state? Or what are you willing to do to remove these people you don't like from your community or whatever? Then they start having to say some pretty whack shit where people will be like, what? Okay, never mind. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. But they don't have to do that now because they can just hide behind the facade of I'm not allowed to say what I want to say. And because of that, that means what I have to say is valid, blah, 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 whatever. Where if you actually let them stand in the limelight for a second, people would be like, what the fuck? Like, no. But I don't know. That's just my opinion, at least.
I think you made a good point. It is so easier to say, well, look, they silenced me, so I have to be right, as opposed to going into a public forum and backing up your ideas.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is that, I mean, I don't know, I can't put my finger on somebody that I met that like I had a lengthy conversation with who is like somebody who would say, yes, I'm a white supremacist. Okay. Right. And what occurs to me is that most of the people that are being given that label, I mean, hell, Tucker Carlson's given that label now, right? So it's like, it occurs to me that if somebody really was, they would stand proudly in it, right? They would be like, yeah, I'm a white supremacist, dude, and I don't apologize for it. And so that's the other reason why with like Nick, it's like, look, I do take him at his word a bit. He calls himself a Christian nationalist. He's a nationalist. Like he talks about issues around race that other people don't talk about or whatever. So he may talk about crime or whatever. And it's like, great. Have the conversation. Let's talk about it. He talks about immigration, and it's like, he doesn't want any immigration happening right now. And it's like, he's not a libertarian, doesn't claim to be one. So, but, I just, to a certain degree, I just take Nick at his word from a standpoint of like what he says he believes. He talks like 2 or 3 hours a night, 5 nights a week. And he's been doing it for years. So it's like, there's plenty of material out there. And that was the other thing too, is we felt like a lot of people had dedicated a lot of, ink and video and audio to all of the worst things that Nick's ever said, but there hadn't been much committed to sort of this other side of things. And that's where we thought there was something interesting because everything else is just sort of rehashing his cookie joke or whatever. And I do think it is interesting. We have a lot of demand to see the film. We're going to be releasing it here in the next couple of weeks online in a way that people can get that.
Yeah, I have one experience where we did run into like a legit white nationalist neo-Nazi. And it was in Washington, D.C. Back in March. Ryan Dawson was premiering a film about Israel stealing the nuclear bombs. And so a bunch of his fans showed up, and this one guy was a Ryan Dawson fan, but he was like a legit fucking Nazi. Like he was talking about how, like, look, I don't want to have to, actually put them in camps, but if they won't leave, like we got it. And he was not welcomed into the fold. There was this one point where we were sitting around a table, and he started spouting off about Ahmaud Arbery down in, I think that was in Georgia, where the guys chased him down and shot him with a shotgun. And he's like, yeah, that boy got what he needed coming to him or whatever. And Ryan actually snapped at him. It was like, dude, shut the fuck up. Like, he walked through a construction site and you think he deserved a death sentence for that. So like the people who are cast as white supremacist or whatever, when you actually meet a real white supremacist, it's shocking. They don't hide it at all. They're not ashamed of it. And it's like, whoa, holy fuck, dude. And he was the only guy that I can remember meeting in person. I've come across them online, and I don't know if they're being more serious on, more edgy online than they would in real life. But even online, when you run into them, like they get angry that I have Dave Smith or Spike Cohen on my show. Like, what are you doing having this member of the tribe on you? Like, like there's no fucking gray line. It's like, holy shit, this guy does not like black people or Jews or whatever. Patriot J, if you like run into people where you're like, holy shit, this is obviously a racist, and it kind of, at least with me, it like pisses me off when everybody's a racist, because then when you run into like legit, actual staunch racists, it's lost its potency as a word. And it's like, what do I call this now? Like, this is fucking bad. But
so in my like 6 or 7 years or so on the right, being politically active, traveling across the country, going to all these events, I have yet to run into a single white nationalist that Democrats say are so prevalent at every Trump rally or every Republican get together, which it surprised me at first when I was coming from the left, because I had this notion in my head that everybody on the right was so evil and racist, but they genuinely welcomed me with open arms. They might point and be like, oh my God, black guy, how'd you get here? And like ask me something, but it's more out of like love, they want to just genuinely know like how I left the Democrat plantation, if you will. But the people who have been the worst to me are white liberals, and dare I say it, Dems are the real racists. I genuinely think that like the girl who tried to cancel me I talked about earlier, or every other white person who comes up to me and calls me a name because I think a different way, I don't think that they would do that if I was white, because I don't know, maybe I guess it's more accepted for white people to be conservatives, so they don't see it as this like affront on them and their control over people who are supposed to be liberals. I have a hard time believing that like these white people would go so hard and call out their white conservative friends like they do to me, a black conservative.
Yeah, I mean, I've found that the most anti-racist people are the most obviously racist people that still exist, unless when you're talking about like the real white nationalists that you run into, if you just change the pronouns or change the adjectives, you could the verbs would stay the same. Like it's all you need to stick with your kind. I don't want to be associated with these people, and if you touch these people, and you're like what Jason was talking about with the 6 degrees to white nationalism, that's how Nazis think too. 6 degrees to Jewishness or whatever. It's the same fucking thing. So it's just ridiculous that these super anti-racist people, they adopt the framework of Nazis and white nationalists.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation there. Yeah. And, I think that one other thing that is interesting is I do think that, Nick is I think he's moving into a phase where more and more people are having him on. Elijah Schaefer had him on, Alex Stein. Yeah, Alex is experiencing blowback on that. You experiencing some blowback on that. But like, I just think it is starting to lose some power. I could be wrong about that, but it just seems that way. And I also just think, and this isn't about Nick, right? Like for me, the story of Nick, I see myself as downstream from Nick, right? Like I'm not that far from the federal government seizing my bank account, putting me on a no-fly list. I mean, like they're trying to get my footage from the Stop the Steal movement, to prosecute people with. And it's like, and I've been deplatformed on a number of places. So I look at what's happening to Nick, and for me, I'm not like, oh yeah, that's some remote possibility that might happen to me. I'm like, no, this is like, I'm actively trying to figure out where I got to put my money so that I can't lose it all in one fell swoop, And so for me, that's why I feel like I have to defend him, is because if I don't stand up for what's going on with Nick, like when it happens to me, it's like, who am I to complain? And so at the same time, I do think that no matter who the person is, it doesn't have to be Nick. There's other, it's Ryan Dawson, whoever it is, it's controversial, whatever. Like, I think people should be courageous and bring them on their platforms and like engage them in conversation and like open up the dialogue. And I know not everybody wants to risk their platforms for that kind of stuff, but I think it's important. And the more people do it, the less power this all has, and the more we can start all talking to each other and really sharpening each other's ideas.
So we just got condemned by somebody again, but
Lord. I got this right now.
Let's see. Your girlfriend stood up for us. Archie, you're a useless garden gnome masquerading as someone who cares about liberty. Being retweeted by fake and dishonest SPLC journalists such as Creed Newton should be a wake-up call for you. Respectfully. But yeah, there's the picture. That's the one that's generated so much controversy.
Dude, even I'm smart enough not to get a photo with Nick.
Yeah, I know. Well, the thing is, like, I actually want to get Nick on the show and challenge him on some stuff. But my thing is, like, you know, he has said like some controversial things about Jewish people controlling the government or whatever. And I want to push him on, like, dude, if that's really what you believe, how can you like Donald Trump? Like, I'm going to come from a different angle. I'm going to be like, you know, pushing him from an angle I don't think too many people have. So,
right.
Nick, if you see this, I want you on the show. I've got real questions. We might have to put it on Odyssey because we'll be pushing the limits of acceptable discussion, but I've got legit questions for you. Yeah, I don't know. You know, the most important part about your film is that everybody should be concerned that they can do what they're doing to Nick to anybody. And I think it's obvious that they're not doing to Nick what they're doing because of the edgy things he's said. It's because he's picking away at certain things that they don't want him to pick away at. So like they don't care about racism or Islamophobia or any of that shit because they murder millions of Muslims every year. And, you know, they were pushing racist shit back in the early 2000s to try to get us to want to go to war. So there's no way they actually care about any of this PC shit that they claim. It's just the ammunition they can use and what they can hide behind. Like, they say they don't like the idea of nationalism based on race, but the people who hate him the most are Zionists. So like that in its own is like, you can't really have any feet to stand on if that's where you're coming from at a point of criticism against him. But I don't know, like it's just so obvious that this is coming for anyone who is a dissenter. They could kick you off airplane flights. They can deplatform you from everything. And that should scare all of us.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things I got into a number of conversations with people around this film when, you know, FreedomFest refused to shoot it, to show it and all of this. And, you know, a lot of it had to do with, so I was making a case that I was like, hey, people were mad that we generated sympathy towards Nick. And I'm like, well, I think he deserves some sympathy because of what happened, you know, what the federal government did to him. And one of the reasons we haven't talked about this very much, but, you know, one of the reasons that he believes and other people have speculated that the government seized money from his bank account was because he had received like a $400,000 Bitcoin donation from this guy in France who then killed himself. He gave some Bitcoin to a number of people on the right, then he killed himself. And so Nick is given all of this Bitcoin. And so then the amount that they seized, theoretically, somebody postulated this, that it was worth what they seized in cash from his bank account, right? So like the other thing that it highlights for me is it's like, you know, people have talked about Bitcoin and crypto being sort of that thing that's like unconfiscatable or whatever. And it's like, no, understand this. They trace a donation. They call Jan 6 a terrorist event. Therefore, they say that donation funded your activities in organizing a terrorist event. Therefore, we seize cash from your bank account that's equivalent to that donation. I mean, dude, that's a series of events that I think should give anybody pause to be like, well, wait a minute, how protected am I from this?
Yeah. And
do I hold any ideas that are like anti-establishment counter narrative? Okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, we still have such a 20th century view gulags and being ostracized and, you know, jackbooted thugs coming to your door and kicking it down and pulling you away in chains. That's not how they deperson you anymore. They disable your bank accounts. They kick you off social media. They make sure you're not allowed to show up at events anymore. That's how they do it. And if they can do it to Nick, they can do it to you just as easily. You got any thoughts on that, Patriot J?
No, I don't.
All right. What do you think is the scariest about January 6th and the way that the America First movement is being treated? Like, what do you think is the biggest misconception people have, and what are the ramifications of that?
Ooh.
You want to take that first, Patriot J?
Yeah, I think the scariest part is that the media can have this narrative, and if they just repeat it over and over again, so many people will buy into it. There are people I genuinely know who think January 6th was worse than 9/11, or it was the darkest day for democracy, and that's only because they're being spoon-fed this by every corporate media. That's alarming. Two, I think given the fact that we had the BLM summer and then this, like, it's completely different, because the BLM summer, they were destroying private property, they were burning, they were looting, just about anything. And then here you have these people on the right who I honestly respected them because they took their grievances straight to the government. They weren't like, oh, I'm going to burn down my own city to protest. They said, no, we're going to show up. And it felt in the moment, it felt like very almost founding fatherly, you know, and then the events and details come out later and it shows that it looks like people were just let in, all of this. But at the time, you know, it genuinely felt right.
So, yeah, Jason, did it feel artificial to you, the storming of the building? Was that, did it feel like it was spurred on from what you saw, or could you not really tell?
Well, I just think that, you know, number one, depending on where you were at around the Capitol, your perspective on what was going on was totally different, right? So, like, on the side where a lot of the conflict and activity was happening was one side of the Capitol. There was other parts of it where I joked, I was like, this was the insurrection scripted by like National Lampoon's Animal House or whatever, because it was like people are like just hanging off the balcony, flying these big, you know, flags, you know, looking a little bit LARPy in what they're up to, you know. And so I didn't know any of the real like violence and conflict between the police and the protesters was even really happening while I was even there. That's just how different it was. And so, you know, I didn't see anything scary that whole day. You know, I did believe that there was likely infiltration of some sort in the different organizations. I mean, most of us already knew that with the Proud Boys. Like, you know, Tario is, you know, had previous contact with federal agents, I believe is pretty well known. And so it's like, and anytime you get a group that big together, I mean, it can be a lot smaller. You got to assume that there's federal agents or informants inside any movement that poses any kind of a threat to the ruling class, the political class, whatever it is on the left or the right or libertarian. But that being said, you know, I do think, and this goes back to the empathy thing, like if you put yourself in the shoes of people who are totally convinced that the election was stolen, which wouldn't be true of any of us here. YouTube, we know that Joe Biden got 81 million votes.
Most secure election ever.
Yes.
Very, very legitimate.
Yeah. But if you were a person who believed that, like, you've just experienced a couple of months where you see that you've had no venue to, you know, get any court hearings, any lawsuits, anything. Like having your grievances redressed has like not occurred. And so now you're really gathering for Trump's last speech. There's this Hail Mary that can happen inside of the Capitol, right? And the Stop the Steal movement, months of work had been put together to get 100 representatives, a handful of senators to object to the electoral count that day. And when the Capitol was breached, that stopped, and it really ended that as a possibility. Now, most of us didn't believe that was actually going to result in anything substantive happening. But but the idea that like Ali Alexander like wanted the Capitol breach is totally bizarre, because it's like, no, it flushed months of work down the toilet and goodwill. Yeah. And that's also why I'm like, hey, I think there was other people who wanted that shut down. And it was just an opportunity. Like, they created a space that I think it was like, look, if we can make sure there's not that many cops, if we can let people have a bit of unruliness, we know that the madness of crowds and a few key people in few key places can generate that narrative that we'll be able to run with this narrative coming out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm saying this unironically, like, I actually don't believe the election was actually stolen, but I think when you don't allow people to talk about it, you generate the thought that it was. And if I'm wrong about that and it actually was, then I want to know that it was. So censoring it, whether or not it's true, is stupid. It just like doesn't get you any closer to the truth. So,
well, and I did want to make one last comment. I haven't actually shared this this publicly yet, but you know, the scariest thing about Jan 6th has been the weaponization of the government towards the Trump sympathetic right. And, you know, I just had an experience. So we started filming our film called The Steal, you know, with followed Ali Alexander around. January 6th happens, yada, yada. Now there's these January 6th hearings and all of this. And so I've talked about before how the Jan 6 committee reached out to me like in February. They wanted me to voluntarily surrender footage, you know, to them. My lawyer said no. And he sent an email to them as to why. And so I didn't hear anything back from them for months, right? So then 2 weeks ago, The Guardian releases an article that names me, talks about our film. They make it sound like we have the smoking gun footage between Roger Stone and Ali Alexander. And they publish this. And
as
when
if that would be filmed.
What's that?
Like as if that would be filmed, you know, like
right, yeah. And a lot of people, a lot of people were joking about this on Twitter. They're like, "Oh my gosh, the worst criminals ever! The documentaries filming your crimes," you know. And it's like, yeah, the smoking gun footage isn't there. But what's interesting is when this article came out, I was like, I noticed that in the article there was language about why we refused to share the footage that was nowhere outside of the communication between my lawyer and the Jan 6 committee. So I believe that the Jan 6 committee, someone in there leaked that language to The Guardian. The Guardian writes the article, and immediately I was like, this is to try to generate some sort of public support to subpoena us, which they haven't really subpoenaed documentary filmmakers up to this point. Well, then a week later, just a few days ago, I got an email from the DOJ, the FBI CC'd on it. And we're in process now of figuring out, I'm trying to figure out, like, you know, I don't want my door kicked in by a SWAT team. But this is real, guys. Like, I mean, and I'm talking about this publicly the first time, like I'm a guy making a film.
Right.
And it's to the point right now where I'm like having to deal with they're trying to get a hold of this. And so I just see that as a weaponization of the federal government towards anyone, anywhere that they can use to push that narrative, prosecute the people. And ultimately, you know, I think they just want to prevent Trump from running again. I think that's the goal of the Jan 6 committee. They may succeed in doing that too. Like, I think people are underestimating whether or not that could actually happen in the next 12 months. So.
Which I find hilarious. My take on all this stuff, like Nick Fuentes, Trump, January 6th, like all the liberals are like, oh my God, those are the worst things in the world. And my whole take on all three is like, I don't get what the big fucking deal is. Like, you guys have turned this into the biggest fucking fiasco ever, when I don't really get what the whole hullabaloo is all about. But Patriot J, you got any final thoughts on anything we talked about? Anything you want to add?
I think this was a great conversation. I hope a lot of people listen to it. It's important to have these conversations about censorship because it's un-American, and that's what irks me the most. I grew up even when I was on the left as a kid, I love like U.S. history. I have such a deep respect for the founders and the founding documents of this nation. And a lot of people just don't, it seems. I think we just need to get back to our roots. We have to live freely. We have to speak freely. We have to be able to act freely. We have to be able to do these things without fear that the feds are going to come through our door or seize our bank accounts.
Yeah,
totally agree, man.
100%.
All right, well, it was great to meet both of you in Vegas, and it was fun doing this stream. I'd love to have you guys both back on at some point. Jason, you'd be a perfect guest for the Four Horsemen sometime in the future, because you're in that. If you want to get canceled, that's the show to be on.
Yeah, right, dude. I'm open for whatever, man. I love it, and I love some of the edgy stuff you guys are doing out there. So, but yeah, it was great meeting you guys both. Patriot J, awesome to connect with you, and yeah, man, I look forward to doing this again sometime. And be well, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so I've got your Substack and your Twitter, Jason, in the description. Anywhere else you want people to follow you?
No, that's it. And that Twitter will probably get shut down at some point once they figure out, ban evasion gets rid of all of my Twitter accounts. But yeah, it's I've got a podcast that we do every once in a while called Cancel Proof, and the Substack, cancelproof.substack.com. We've written a lot about what happened with FreedomFest, and that's where we're going to also announce when the film is released for those who want to see it, see what the big deal is. I think it's been built up so much now that I'm like, it's really not that big a deal, guys. Yeah,
exactly. That's how this all works. Patriot J, I've got your website and I think a link to all your music streaming. Anything else you want to say, or anything else you want to mention for people to follow you?
Nope. Just follow me on all platforms at Sir Hottest.
Nice.
Well, it was great, guys. Thanks for coming on. Tonight, I will be doing the Four Horsemen with Jeremy Kaufman at 8:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you're watching this live, make sure you catch that live. It's going to be a good show. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me.
Bye.
And
later.